The medical examiner's report said Daniel Mercer had been dead for 3 to 5 years. Daniel Mercer had been missing for 11. Both statements appear in the same case file. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in March. A detective in a mid-sized county sheriff's office picked up the phone, listened for about 40 seconds, and then set it down without saying much. His partner said he just stared at the wall. Then he said, "They found Daniel Mercer." That should have been a relief. Daniel had been missing for 11 years. His family had moved through hoping, then grieving, then accepting. There was a memorial plaque on the wall of the community center where he used to volunteer. People had marked him as gone, but the detective didn't look relieved. Yeah, he looked like someone who had just read something that didn't belong in the file he was holding. A hiker found the remains in a shallow ravine off a fire road in rural Oregon on March 4th. The Park Service was contacted. Forensic teams were dispatched. The remains were recovered, cataloged, and transported. Standard procedure. Then the analysis came back. Based on skeletal condition, tissue remnants, soil chemistry, and environmental exposure, the estimate was consistent. The remains had been in that location for 3 to 5 years. Daniel had been missing for 11. The assessment was run twice. The number didn't change. No announcement was made. The case was quietly reclassified. 2 separate reports were filed, one for the official record, one for internal review. As of the time this was compiled, neither has been reconciled. What follows is what is known in the order it became known. Daniel Mercer was 31 years old, lived alone, and followed the same routine so consistently that when he stopped showing up, the people around him noticed within hours. That kind of life leaves a clear record, which is part of what makes what happened later so difficult to explain. He lived in Kellerton, a small city in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place with a decent downtown, a few coffee shops people actually liked, and a population that had stayed roughly the same for 30 years. Not a place things happened, not a place people left in a hurry. Daniel had grown up there. He went to Kellerton High, did 2 years at the community college, and eventually took a job as a logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company called Creston and Vale. It wasn't a remarkable job, but he was good at it. His supervisor at the time, a woman named Pat Okafor, later described him as someone who noticed things. She meant it as a compliment. He caught errors before they became problems. He kept quiet about it, which she appreciated. He rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Larkin Avenue. He lived alone, but the second bedroom had been converted into something between a home office and a reading room. Shelves on 3 walls, a desk that faced a window overlooking the parking lot. Neighbors said he kept irregular hours, sometimes lights on late, sometimes gone before sunrise, but he was courteous, quiet, and never a problem. He had a small circle. A few friends from high school he still saw occasionally. A brother, Marcus, who lived about 40 minutes north and who he had dinner with most Sundays. A woman he had dated for about 2 years, named Claire Yost, who had moved to Seattle the previous spring. They had ended things without much visible conflict. Both described it later as mutual and low drama. Neither had spoken to the other in the months before Daniel disappeared. He ran, not competitively, just for the habit of it. 3 to 4 times a week, early morning, a loop through the neighborhood that took about 40 minutes. He logged his runs in a small paper notebook he kept on the kitchen counter. Not an app, a notebook, with a pen attached by a rubber band. Miles, time, weather, nothing else. His weekends followed a pattern. Saturday mornings were for errands. Saturday afternoons, depending on the season, he might go for a longer drive. Not to anywhere specific, just to move. Sunday was Marcus and dinner. Occasionally he'd stop at the community center on Sunday evenings to help with a youth literacy program he'd been involved with for about 3 years. He wasn't the face of it. He showed up, helped, and left. People who knew Daniel well described him in similar terms. Reliable, self-contained, not particularly easy to read, but not closed off either. He just didn't offer more than was asked. His mental health history, as later reconstructed from records and interviews, showed one period of treatment for depression about 4 years prior. He had seen a therapist for roughly 8 months, stopped when he felt stabilized, and had not resumed. His GP at the time noted nothing concerning at his last annual visit, which was 10 months before he disappeared. There was nothing dramatic in his history. No outstanding debts beyond a manageable car loan, no legal issues, no documented conflicts with anyone. His credit cards showed normal spending, groceries, gas, the same 2 restaurants on rotation, an occasional online order. He was, by every available measure, a person living a quiet and stable life. Which is why, when he didn't show up to work on a Wednesday in February, Pat Okafor waited until noon before calling his cell phone. He didn't answer. Daniel's car was still in the parking lot. His wallet was still in the apartment. His phone was not. Those 3 details defined the early investigation, and none of them pointed in a clean direction. The last confirmed sighting of Daniel Mercer was on a Tuesday evening, February 7th. A neighbor in his building, a retired teacher named Gil Fromm, saw Daniel in the parking lot at approximately 6:20 p.m. Daniel was getting something from his car. Fromm couldn't say what. Something small. They exchanged a few words. Fromm later described it as brief and unremarkable. Daniel seemed fine. No agitation, no distraction. He said goodnight and went inside. That was the last time anyone who knew him saw him. His apartment showed no sign of disturbance. When police eventually entered on Thursday, after both Pat Okafor and Marcus had been unable to reach him, everything appeared normal. Dishes in the drying rack, a half-finished book face down on the arm of the couch, his laptop on the desk, closed but not put away, his running notebook on the kitchen counter. The last entry in the notebook was for Monday, February 6th. Time, distance, temperature, nothing else. His car was in the parking lot. A person who walks away, who chooses to go somewhere, usually takes their car. Daniel's was exactly where it was supposed to be, undisturbed, with a dusting of frost on the windshield that suggested it hadn't been moved in at least 24 hours. His wallet was in the apartment. His phone was not. The phone was never found. Cell records, obtained within the first week of the investigation, showed that Daniel's phone had been active on the Tuesday evening. 2 outgoing calls, one to Marcus at 7:14 p.m. that lasted 4 minutes, and one to a number registered to a local pizza place at 7:38 p.m. After that, no activity. The phone pinged a tower near his apartment at 8:02 p.m. and went dark. Either it died, was turned off, or moved outside of any serviceable range. Marcus confirmed the call. They had talked briefly, nothing unusual, he said. Daniel mentioned he was tired and planning an early night. He said he'd see Marcus on Sunday. Sunday came and went. No one saw Daniel leave the building. There was no exterior camera coverage on the side of the building where his apartment entrance was located. The parking lot had a single camera mounted near the main entrance, but it was angled toward outbound vehicles and had a documented history of intermittent recording failures. Footage from the relevant period was partially corrupted, not completely, but enough that only about a third of the Tuesday night window was recoverable. What was recovered showed no vehicles entering or exiting in an unusual pattern, no figures on foot after 8:30 p.m. The investigation was opened formally on Thursday, February 9th. Detectives canvassed the building. They spoke to Gil Fromm, to 2 other neighbors who had no relevant information, and to the building manager. Nothing surfaced. No one had heard anything unusual Tuesday night. The working theory in the early days was voluntary disappearance. People left sometimes. They left for reasons they didn't announce. The absence of Daniel's phone was consistent with someone who didn't want to be found. But the wallet stayed, and the car stayed. And his brother, who knew him better than anyone, told investigators flatly that Daniel would not simply vanish. He wasn't built for that, Marcus said. He didn't run from things. The case stayed open. 6 weeks into the investigation, a witness came forward with a sighting of Daniel on the morning after he was last confirmed present. That detail was logged, noted, and filed. It was not resolved. The missing persons report generated a standard investigation protocol. In the weeks following Daniel's disappearance, detectives conducted interviews with his employer, his brother, his former therapist, under limited disclosure, several friends from his social circle, and Claire Yost, who drove down from Seattle voluntarily and cooperated fully. None of these interviews produced a lead. A timeline was assembled from available records. Cell data, card transactions, building access logs, and the parking lot footage were all compiled into a documented sequence. It was orderly work that arrived at a disorderly conclusion. Daniel Mercer had been in his apartment on Tuesday evening, spoken to his brother by phone, and was then simply not anywhere that could be confirmed. A search of the surrounding area was organized in the second week. Volunteers, a dog unit, and 2 detectives on foot covered a radius of about 2 miles from his building. Nothing was found. His bank account showed no activity after February 7th. Not a single transaction. His direct deposit from Creston and Vale landed on the 15th and sat untouched. His rent auto payment processed as normal in March. Then again in April until Marcus contacted the landlord and the account was eventually closed. His phone provider confirmed the tower ping at 8:02 p.m. was the final location data. The phone had not been used, charged, or connected since. By April, the active investigation had slowed considerably. Cases with no leads tend to do that. Files remained open. Detectives moved on to other priorities. A missing persons entry stayed in the national database. Then, in March, about 6 weeks after the disappearance, a woman named Donna Wexler contacted the tip line. She said she had seen a man matching Daniel's description on the morning of Wednesday, February 8th. Not the evening he was last confirmed present. The morning after. She described seeing him walking east on Tillman Street at approximately 7:30 a.m., moving at a steady pace, not running. She said she noticed him because she walked the same route most mornings and recognized him as someone she had seen before in the neighborhood, though she did not know his name. She was clear about the date. She was clear about the time. She said he appeared calm, dressed in a jacket and jeans, and was not carrying anything visible. Detectives followed up. They noted it in the file. But her statement complicated the timeline rather than resolved it, and without corroboration, it remained in a category marked unverified. No one else reported seeing Daniel on that morning. The file grew quieter. Months passed. A year passed. Donna Wexler's account stayed in the record, unremarked upon, between 30 other pages of inconclusive information. The remains were identified as Daniel Mercer. That part was straightforward. Everything after that was not. 11 years after his disappearance, a hiker named Reese Corbin was moving off trail in the Caldera Creek Wilderness area, a stretch of undeveloped forest about 90 miles southeast of Kellerton. He was not lost. He had been hiking in that area for years and had explored sections of it that most people didn't reach. He was following a dry creek bed when the terrain dropped unexpectedly into a shallow ravine. He scrambled down to get a better look and found what he initially thought was debris from an old campsite. It was not debris. He called it in immediately. The Park Service responded, followed by county sheriff's deputies and eventually a forensic team. The scene was processed over the course of 2 days, and the remains were skeletal, largely intact given the conditions. There was clothing, the remnants of a jacket and jeans, consistent with what Donna Wexler had described, a rusted zipper pull, a fragment of fabric from what might have been a shoe. There was no phone, no wallet, no identifying documents of any kind. The identification came through DNA comparison against a family sample Marcus Mercer had provided to the database years earlier, precisely for a situation like this. It was Daniel. That confirmation closed one question and opened several others immediately. The medical examiner's assessment was thorough and carefully worded. Skeletal analysis, soil chemistry, the degree of weathering on the clothing remnants, entomological evidence, or rather the absence of certain expected evidence, all pointed in the same direction. The remains had been in that location for somewhere between 3 and 5 years, likely no more than 6, under even the most generous interpretation of the environmental factors. The language in the report was precise, consistent with a post-mortem interval of 3 to 5 years, with a probable midpoint of 4 years. Daniel had been missing for 11. The forensic team ran the assessment twice. The results were consistent. A separate review was requested from an independent specialist at a university forensics program. That review arrived at a similar conclusion, cautiously phrased, acknowledging variables, but not materially different. There was a gap of roughly 6 to 8 years between when Daniel disappeared and when the evidence suggested he died. The file was reclassified. An internal review was opened. And a question that no one in the department could answer out loud started circulating quietly. Where was Daniel Mercer for those 6 years? 3 separate pieces of evidence were examined independently. Each one pointed in the same direction. None of them could be reconciled with the others. The simplest explanation, that the forensic estimates were wrong, was the first one examined. It was not dismissed lightly. Forensic dating of remains is not an exact science. Soil conditions, temperature fluctuation, elevation, and wildlife activity all introduce variables. The independent specialist's report acknowledged this clearly. But the estimates were not slightly off. They were not within a margin of error that could account for 6 additional years. Even at the outermost range of the assessment, the numbers didn't reach 2013, the year Daniel disappeared. Not close. A geological survey of the ravine site was conducted. The findings added another layer. Like the soil composition around the remains showed evidence of seasonal water movement. The creek bed flooded partially during winter months. Over time, this would have created stratification in the sediment layers. The forensic geologist who examined the site noted that the depth and distribution of the remains within that stratification was consistent with the shorter timeline, not the longer one. In plain terms, the ground itself suggested Daniel had been there for years, not more than a decade. Investigators then turned back to the original case file. Daniel's apartment had been cleared out by his estate roughly 18 months after his disappearance. His belongings had been divided between Marcus and a storage unit that Marcus kept until it became impractical. Some items were donated. The car had been sold. Yeah, but the running notebook had been kept. Marcus had held onto it without knowing why. He described it as one of those decisions that doesn't feel like a decision. He just didn't want to throw it away. When investigators asked to examine it as part of the renewed review, Marcus handed it over without hesitation. The notebook was a simple composition-style journal with dated entries going back approximately 2 years before Daniel's disappearance. The entries were consistent in format: short, factual, no personal reflection. Date, miles, time, weather. The last entry remained what it had always been recorded as: Monday, February 6th. But when the notebook was examined more carefully under magnification, a technician noticed something in the binding. Several pages near the back had been removed, not torn, cut, very close to the spine, with something precise. The remaining stubs were narrow enough that they were easy to miss in a casual examination. The number of missing pages was estimated at between 8 and 12. If Daniel had kept his logging pattern consistent, that would represent somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks of entries. No one had noticed this 11 years ago. It wasn't that the detail had been examined and dismissed. It simply hadn't been caught. The phone records were re-pulled. The last tower ping on February 7th placed Daniel's phone near his apartment at 8:02 p.m. That had always been the final data point, but an analyst noticed something that had been overlooked. The phone had connected briefly to a tower approximately 63 miles southeast of Kellerton at 4:17 a.m. on February 8th. The connection lasted 11 seconds. It was logged as a failed attempt, the kind of brief contact that happens when a phone searches for a network and doesn't complete a stable connection. 63 miles southeast of Kellerton. The fire road where Daniel's remains were eventually found was approximately 90 miles southeast of Kellerton, along the same corridor. It was not proof of anything. An 11-second failed connection in the middle of the night could mean many things, but it meant the phone was moving, or it had been moved, and Donna Wexler had seen a man matching Daniel's description walking east toward that corridor at 7:30 on the morning of February 8th. The 3 data points refused to resolve into anything clean. The remains said he had been there for 4 years. The phone said something was moving southeast at 4 a.m. The witness said she saw him walking, calm and unhurried, at 7:30 in the morning, and then 11 years of silence. The forensic estimate said 4 years. The disappearance was 11 years ago. The difference between those two numbers is 6 years that no record accounts for. That is where the investigation currently sits. There is a version of this story where all of it is explainable. Forensic estimates carry error margins, witnesses misremember dates, cell tower artifacts are common and meaningless, pages fall out of old notebooks. Each of these has happened before in isolation. Each is documented in investigative case literature as a source of false leads and confused timelines. The problem is that they are all here, in the same file, pointing in the same direction. The internal review is ongoing as of this writing. The findings have not been made public. The reclassified case file is not subject to current disclosure requests under the applicable statutes, and investigators involved have declined to comment on specific details. What is available comes from records obtained before the reclassification from Marcus Mercer, who has spoken carefully and only about what he directly experienced, and from a few procedural documents that entered the public record before the case was moved to a different designation. Marcus was informed of the forensic timeline discrepancy in a meeting with the lead investigator. He described that meeting in a brief interview as the most disorienting conversation he had ever had. He said the investigator was professional and measured. She explained the estimates, the variables, the ranges. She explained that the findings were inconsistent with what had been assumed. She was careful not to use language that implied any specific explanation, but Marcus is not an unintelligent person. He understood what the gap implied. If Daniel died somewhere between 3 and 5 years before his remains were found, and his remains were found in 2024, that places his death somewhere between 2019 and 2021. He disappeared in 2013, that is, at minimum, 6 years unaccounted for. 6 years during which his bank account was empty, his phone was silent, and no one who knew him saw his face. 6 years during which no record of his existence appeared anywhere that investigators have so far been able to locate. Marcus told the interviewer that he went home after that meeting and sat in his kitchen for a long time. Right? He said he kept thinking about the Sunday dinners, the routine of it, every week, the same. And how, when Daniel stopped showing up, he had assumed the worst, the way you do. He had grieved in that direction. He had organized himself around that loss. But the math said something different now. The math said that for several of those Sunday dinners, maybe many of them, Daniel had still been alive, somewhere. Not unreachable because he was gone. Unreachable for another reason, entirely. Marcus said he didn't have a word for what that felt like. He said it wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more persistent. The sense that a story he thought he understood had just shown him a room he didn't know was there. He said he still has the running notebook. Yeah, he said he's thought many times about the missing pages, what they might have recorded, where they went, whether someone removed them before or after. He doesn't have an answer. The investigation doesn't have one either, not yet. What remains is a timeline with a gap in the middle, a man who disappeared, a set of remains that arrived too late to match, a phone that moved in the night, and a witness who saw someone walking calmly into the morning. No explanation has been formally offered. No explanation has been ruled out. The case is open. If you followed cases like this one, you know that the most unsettling details are rarely the loudest ones. They're the ones that sit quietly in a file for 11 years, waiting for someone to look again.